Well, thank you so much, Senator Ambassador Hutchison. We appreciate you being here, and we're grateful, first of all, for your willingness to speak to us, and also for your service to the state of Texas, to the United States, and to the global community. I'm especially excited because we don't really have a way to cover the national security aspect of international law, and so this is, I think, a unique opportunity. I was speaking with Senator Hutchison over lunch, and she expressed the desire to have questions from the audience, and I agree that that's a more interesting way to do things. So I have some prepared questions that we will discuss, but I hope you'll be thinking about the things that you'd like to learn about on this topic. And if you want to ask a question, just please kind of obviously raise your hand and make yourself known. And Remington, one of my excellent rolling scholars from the past, will run that microphone over to you. All right. So first of all, I wanted to just start out with some of your experiences that you encountered as a senator that related to international law. I know you were very active, and especially in the national security space even then, but can you kind of share sort of where you cut your teeth when it came to international affairs?
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me to be here. It's great to have an international law section of the State Bar, and I'm sure that is growing exponentially as we go global and do so much more business overseas. But certainly, as a United States Senator, where I served 20 years, so there were a lot of businesses that needed help, maybe in a particular country where they had investments or particular issues in those countries where, of course, I could be a person that could go to that country or that ambassador in Washington and work on issues. But also there were trade issues, there were fair trade issues, especially, certainly with our trading partners. And so as you are making law, you certainly want to hear from the businesses, the lawyers who are representing the businesses about what they're running into. There were a lot of complaints about the EU just really freezing out American products by certain requirements for certain products within a product that they wouldn't accept. And there were issues like that we could then work through in our system to assure that we had free and fair trade. So I went to NATO when I was a senator and talked about our security issues, talked about the importance of what NATO was doing, and America is the leader of NATO. So the Supreme Allied Commander of NATO is always an American, and so we had always the business of finding out what NATO needed, what they needed to be doing, how we sometimes had to bring our allies in and urge them to do more or to produce certain kinds of arms. In NATO, we decide what we need for the overall security umbrella of North America and Europe, and then we ask countries to take the responsibility to produce those, and they do, and then we have to monitor that and make sure that we are covered with the technology, the airplanes, the tanks, the ammunition, all the things that we would need if we really had a conflict. So any senator deals in international law, policy, human rights, and that's part of our job, representing America.
I'd like to turn now to the experience as ambassador to NATO. There we go. Thank you. So can you tell us, first of all, what that entails? And you mentioned something interesting that I hadn't considered, and I'd like you to go into it. But there's the members of the alliance, but then there are these affiliated or associated countries too.
NATO has been evolving since it was founded right after World War II, And it was formed by the leaders of 12 nations that knew they needed America in any conflict early, because they had seen the carnage that happened in Europe in World War I and then again in World War II, and they wanted to do more to deter war and to have America involved from the beginning. And that has worked very well, and it has evolved through the years, and in fact, they're going to celebrate their 75th anniversary next year in Washington. And it has been a truly, well, it's not only truly successful, it's the longest running military political alliance in the history of the world. And that is because it has been flexible, it has had issues, solved issues, and right now, I would say NATO is evolving through our partnerships and solidifying our partnerships. Most people know that NATO has now just become 31 countries with the addition of Finland, and Sweden will get in, I believe, very shortly, and that will be 32. Vladimir Putin has never understood that we never asked someone to join NATO. A country that wants to join NATO approaches NATO, asks to become an ally, and they have to meet certain standards. And particularly after the breakup of the Soviet Union, the standards are: you have to have a resilient democracy, you have to have a rule of law, you have to have an independent judiciary, you have to have human rights, and accept human rights, and a free press. So basically, every country that comes in has to meet certain standards. That's because we have Article 5, which I know most people refer to and understand. That means if one of us is attacked, we're all attacked. So if Russia tries to invade the Czech Republic or Poland or Estonia, Lithuania, if they cross that border, and Putin knows this, which is why Putin has always gone for a non-NATO country when they were going to do mischief. Ukraine is not a NATO country, nor is Georgia. They are friends, though, and we hope very much eventually to have Georgia and Ukraine in NATO. They're wonderful countries trying to solve some corruption issues. But NATO does have 40 partners. So we have 31 allies that have committed our treasure and our lives to support the attacked country. But we have 40 allies that are not partners, that are not allies, but they are partners. So we have Asia-Pacific partners, Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, Japan, and we have Middle Eastern partners that include Kuwait, Qatar, UAE, Bahrain, Morocco. So we have quite a large group of partners that we are now beginning to convene to have more interoperability, more exercises, because we're seeing not only this aggressive Russia, which we know if we don't stand firm to help Ukraine and Russia wins, Ukraine loses, that Russia will not stop. Vladimir Putin will not stop. He will go to the next likely non-NATO country, but eventually he would think he could get by with going into a NATO country. Right now he understands that he can't. But it's also a message to China. It's also a message to President Xi that the Western democracies and the like-minded are going to be united. Now, we say we're going to be united. We must be united as we face a potential adversary in China, because the leverage that we would have with China is only one leverage, and that is economic. China needs to be able to trade and invest or have investments from the G20 countries, the largest economies of the world. So if we can continue to work with China and try to bring them into the rules-based order so that we will not have a blow up with Taiwan, because we do recognize Taiwan is trying so hard to be an independent nation, and we support that, just like we support Ukraine. So we are now evolving into a security umbrella for the like-minded, for those who want to join NATO, want to be a partner with NATO. We will work with the partners to strengthen their democracies, strengthen their militaries, but the ones that have asked to be allies are the ones that have met those certain standards. And I think if we hadn't expanded NATO, which was controversial in the beginning, I think we would have had a very different result right now. I think Russia would have already taken Ukraine, for instance. And I think that these other countries that were Soviet republics have gained their own strength because they had to qualify to be allies at NATO. So the Poland, the Czech Republic, Slovenia, Slovakia, Croatia, the Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, all have strengthened their own democracies, strengthened the government, strengthened their military, and have become so much more able to repel the Russian influence that is all over the areas where those people did live under the Russian Soviet Union before.
After this question, I'd like to get any questions from the audience, but as a follow-up to your comments, what is it that NATO can do, either in front of the world or behind the scenes, to ensure that there's this united front, especially vis-a-vis China?
Yes, it is very important that NATO send the signal of unity. And unfortunately, I think we lost a little ground a couple of weeks ago when President Macron from France went over to China and told President Xi that they weren't just going to follow in America's footsteps. And that was unfortunate, because if we are going to have the ability to deter China, it has to be with a united NATO. It has to be with a united G20, really. And so I think he spoke, he got a lot of retribution within France for what he said, and most certainly in the EU. The other European countries were aghast that President Macron would do something like that, go and visit China and act like what they were doing was okay. Well, what they're doing is not okay. They're putting blockades up around Taiwan. They are they're doing cyber attacks, which Russia does as well there, and they're doing a lot of menacing port calls at Japan and South Korea. And so any disunity will take away any leverage we have, because what we want with China is free and fair trade and a good relationship. We don't want to have tensions with China. We have them now. But we believe that the way to avoid a confrontation with China is to show that we are strong, that we are committed, and that we are united, and that there would be consequences that would be too expensive for China if they decided to invade and take over Taiwan. And also, if they would use the tactics they used against Australia, when Australia spoke up and said that we needed to investigate the causes of COVID. And Australia also put out very generic rules for
being able to bid on the communications system in Australia, and it included that any company that got the bid had to be able to keep its contractual requirement for privacy and not sharing certain information. Well, Huawei could not do that, and China was furious and sent their people over to Australia, threatened Australia, and then in fact did have a trade embargo on Australia, and and China was Australia's largest trading partner, and they started throwing Australian wine off the docks and doing all kinds of retaliations. So other countries looked at that and said, oh my gosh, if we're going to have leverage, it's going to have to be that we are united and that we will not stand for that kind of economic coercion, which China was doing to Australia, which they also do to other countries in trading agreements. So it's very important that we continue to do what we're doing, and that is to expanding our partnerships. NATO invited, for the first time in history, the heads of state of 4 Asia-Pacific democracies to their head of state summit last year, which was Australia, New Zealand, South Korea, and Japan. And the heads of state all came, and they participated with the heads of state of all of the NATO allies. And it was a beginning of bringing those Asia-Pacific countries in to interoperability exercises, and there's now much more activity of NATO ally ships in the straits of between China and Taiwan, the South China Sea, and so it's evolving, and it's going to continue to evolve to be a larger security umbrella for people who want to keep our way of life, our freedoms, and free and fair trade.
So some questions from the audience. If you could just go, yes. Justice Zimmer, why don't we have you go first? You'll need to speak loud. I apologize, and I'll repeat the question.
Quite all right. I'll try to speak up. Senator Hutchison, do you have any insights into Turkey's reluctance with regard to Finland, Sweden, and possibly Ukraine?
Yes.
He read the script, I think.
Yes, right, exactly. He had on his list of
Great
questions about Turkey and then Finland and Sweden, of course. And of course, when Finland and Sweden had both been neutral after World War II, and Finland has a long border with Russia, almost as long as Texas and Mexico. And Finland has been invaded by Russia, but they fought back, and they have very strong military, as does Sweden. They will be huge value-added countries to NATO when both of them get in. Finland has been accepted. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, he first said that they were not going to agree to Finland and Sweden, and unless there were certain required commitments that would be made. And so they finally let in Finland, but not Sweden, because Sweden has a very strict law about freedom of religion, and a citizen blew up a Koran in front of the Turkish embassy, and that caused, this was in Sweden. And so Turkey said, forget it. We're not agreeing to your coming into our NATO alliance. And so that's something that happened. It certainly wasn't condoned by the government of Sweden. They have apologized, et cetera. I believe that after the elections in Turkey, which are May the 14th, that then the issue of Sweden getting in will probably pass. I believe it will pass before the next summit that is scheduled for this summer. And it's essential that Sweden get in, because but Finland and Sweden are very closely tied. They are close in their interoperability of their military, and they will be a great value added for NATO, because they too have a smaller Russia border, but very significant. To have Finland and Sweden with Norway, which is already a great member of NATO, now you really have the high north well covered. And there's a lot of Russia and Chinese activity in the high north now. The high north being the Arctic and on down into the Atlantic from the north. And China is trying to get ports in Greenland and Iceland. Russia is, of course, very active, has been, but Russia has the border. China created an Arctic Belt and Road Initiative. China has no access into the Arctic, but nevertheless, the Arctic Belt and Road Initiative was established so that they would begin to get assets in those countries. That they're also trying to get scientific experiments in the islands that Russia controls in the Arctic up in the north. So there's a lot of activity up there. It will be very helpful to have Sweden and Finland. I believe that Sweden will get in, and I believe they will be a very big value for NATO in all of our missions. And Finland and Sweden have been in our Afghanistan mission. Finland and Sweden were part of that. Many of our partners were part of that effort, and also in Iraq. So we've had partners in our missions, and it helps a lot to have that interoperability before they're allies even, and now I think they will be eventually both added and be a real value, hopefully by this summer, Sweden.
Question there, yes.
Hi, Leon. Given the importance you placed earlier on both unity and democratic standards, how do you foresee NATO handling the issue of democratic backsliding seen in countries like Hungary and Turkey?
Mm-hmm. That's a really good question. It's a tough one, actually, because it's a hard dilemma. There is no mechanism to kick somebody out of NATO. So there's no mechanism to say to Turkey, you are uninvited to NATO, or Hungary. But they are clearly backsliding in some areas. And so what we have done is just used heavy diplomacy as we're dealing. Now, Hungary will generally come around on what is a clear consensus at NATO. Everything that happens in NATO is by unanimous consent. So they can hold up, and Turkey uses that more than most others. And but they will eventually make an agreement. There will be a negotiation, and Turkey will say, okay. But it's always prolonged, and it's always something that we deal with. The alternative would be to tell Turkey, we don't want you in NATO. So what does that give us? For Turkey to go jump in Putin's arms, even more than they already have? And look at the geography. Turkey is that whole southern part of Europe that is standing between Europe and the Middle East. And frankly, Turkey has done a great job of setting up refugee camps from Syria so that they didn't come into the other part of Europe. And we have helped pay for the costs of those, but Turkey has been willing to do it. So, you know, just saying to Turkey, you're not welcome here, really would make a lot of problems for Europe, and everyone knows that, and Erdogan knows that too. And so it's a tough question, and you just keep working through it one day at a time, one issue at a time. And I believe that Turkey will, after the elections, whatever the result is, I believe that there will be some accommodation and Sweden will get in, and it will be great for NATO, and I'm just hoping that I'm right.
So unfortunately, we're nearing the end of our time. I wanted to just ask you one final question that relates to the section itself and also the attorneys and law students here. But we as international lawyers within the state of Texas, what kind of things can we do in our own practices or in our education to promote the rule of law, to promote international law understanding within our communities within Texas?
Well, you know, that's a great question because, first of all, having this section of the Texas Bar is very important because you are learning a lot from each other, but also from the speakers about what is going on and the relationship with foreign countries. But if I were going to say what more could you do, I think that, first of all, SMU is trying very hard to put into place a program for government people who are dealing in foreign affairs. So State Department, Defense Department, U.S. Trade Representative, to set up a mid-level program that these mid-level people in these departments that will be doing international business would come to SMU and learn about business. Because most of the government employees, the foreign service officers, the military people are great people, but they don't know business. They don't know what a business that is trying to invest in Slovakia needs to have from the embassy, the help they need. If a business should be able to go to an embassy in any of our countries and say, I want to build a manufacturing plant, or I want to, I'm seeking a trading partner for my product that would then add jobs into Slovenia. And they need that, and many businesses don't know how to do it. You all are on the front line representing your businesses, and you can help them understand they can go to the embassy and they can get help, but they don't really know how. And what SMU is trying to do through the business school is set up a program that would take those mid-level government employees in those departments and train them, take them out to Texas Instruments, take them out to trying to think of where else you would have these really big international needs.
Caterpillar.
And show them, yeah, or like there's a Samsung office here, and there are just Tesla in Austin, but you could teach these people what would be needed and how to get into the embassies or how to get into the military. The military, where we have bases or where we have military attaches in most of our embassies, they'll know the military people in that foreign country, and they'll be able to talk to them and say, oh, you know, yes, we make a product in Dallas or Austin or Georgia, and it could fit into the new electronic system that you're doing. And there are so many things that we could gain from that. So any help that the lawyers who are committed to doing international work that could help with this effort would be great. And in human rights, some of you are doing human rights law work, and the State Department is very active in that. And we need to have you all know what the State Department can do, but they, throughout the countries where there are human rights issues, Middle East or Africa, there needs to be an awareness of how there can be a help for you in these departments. And that can be worked through this or through like CALE or SMU used to have a great program that I worked with the former dean in bringing some of these foreign, the new leaders of countries that were coming out of autocracies, some in the Middle East, some in Europe, Eastern Europe, and would learn about the rule of law, the importance of the rule of law, which, a freedom fighter that's protesting in the streets to want to have a democracy and not be in a dictatorship doesn't know why the rule of law is important. They think democracy is voting and everything else will happen. They don't understand the underpinnings of keeping a democracy, which is independent judiciary, human rights, freedom of the press, rule of law, where the government can lose a case in court. They are aghast. What? The government can go to court and lose? Well, of course, all of their judges are government, and it's not independent. And the same for just the idea that you could have laws that would, for instance, police, teaching these countries that police are for the protection of the citizens, because the police in many of these countries have always been the enforcers of the bad regime. And so, you even see that in the developed countries. They don't revere their militaries. They look at our generals that they meet like even at NATO, and they say, we don't have generals like that are good people, that converse with the public, that are trying to make sure that things are done ethically, that there's no corruption. All these things are things that we take for granted, but these countries that are seeking a resilient democracy, they need our help to show them how you keep a resilient democracy. So all of those things are things that we can do better and do more by setting examples and by being active, as many of you are in these foreign countries, and understanding them, what they're going through, what they don't understand, the concept of good policemen, good military people, non-corruption. That's something that we need to show.
Well, thank you so much for being with us today. Please join me in giving Senator Ambassador Hutchison a hand. Thank you.